You've been searching for the best way to generate passive income in your life and heard that real estate is a great way to do it. But you're tired of all the so-called gurus who are all talk and no substance. Get ready to celebrate because Kevin Bupp has spent 14 years successfully making it happen. This is the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast. Now, here's Kevin Bupp.
Hey guys, Kevin Bupp here, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, where our mission is to help you build and maintain massive amounts of cash flow through income-producing real estate investments. Now, our guest for this week's show is asset protection expert and founder of Bradley Legal Corp, Brian Bradley. Now, Brian is a leading educator and asset protection attorney for high-risk business professionals, entrepreneurs, and real estate investors. Brian's firm focuses on adding value for clients and educating them on what they don't realize that they don't know. What Brian does for his clients is act as an advisor and focuses on setting up systems and strategic teams to protect your assets and manage your wealth. The goal of lifestyle preservation, peace of mind, and changing the way predators view you, along with better tax planning, risk management, and decreasing your taxable estate. Now, Brian also acts as Chief Knowledge Officer for firms helping to maximize their value of existing and new products, along with technology integration. Now, Brian was selected to the Lawyers of Distinction List 2019, Super Lawyers Rising Star List 2015, nominated to America's Top 100 High Stakes Litigators List, and nominated to the 2017 Law Firm 500 Award. And so with that, guys, I'm excited to get on to the show with Brian, but before we do, I just have a few quick housekeeping items. Like I do each and every week, I like to share my one personal and one professional best of the prior week. Now, a personal best I'll start off with. In an effort to get into the holiday spirit, this past weekend, my family and I, we went gangbusters with Christmas decorations and lighting. You know, we put up the original lighting, the main lighting, a couple of weeks back. However, we added to it, and we're in a new home. I guess we moved in last year right around Christmas. We're only in here about a week prior to Christmas last year, and so we didn't have an opportunity to do a lot of decorations, what have you. And so this year we kind of went all out, and it looks absolutely awesome. Additionally, we busted out the elf on the shelf and got that fun tradition rolling for the kids. Then we spent some quality time with the boys making ornaments for the tree. So absolutely just a great weekend. In addition to that, on Saturday evening, we actually held a celebratory dinner at our home for the volunteer staff that assisted us in this year's 72 Hours to Key West charity bike ride that I host each and every year. We ended up donating just over $44,000 to two local charities that are absolutely near and dear to my heart. As far as the professional best, I've been putting a great deal of effort into creating quality content on a variety of social media channels, including Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and it's been absolutely great. So just been having a lot of fun doing it. I really enjoy doing this podcast. I enjoy creating value and just sharing information that I have with those that have an interest in bettering their life by real estate investing. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to look me up on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. Now you can also find my YouTube channel. Again, for the past month or so, I've been putting out a ton of additional content, more than just the normal podcast. So be sure to go check that out. Hey guys, if you love what we're doing here at the Real Estate Investing for Cash Flow podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show, and also do us a favor by leaving a review and rating on iTunes. It really allows us to grow the show and reach more awesome people. And one last thing before we get rolling here with the show with Brian, just want to remind you of the free 30-minute phone call that I offer each and every Friday. I set aside 2 to 3 30-minute time slots where you can get on the phone with me to talk about anything and everything your heart desires about real estate investing. So this is a way for me to connect with you, and there's no ulterior motive here, just a way for me to give back and have a lot of fun talking about real estate investing. Go to my website, kevinbupp.com, to sign up for that phone call. And now, guys, without further ado, let's get on to the part of the show that you've been waiting for, which is our interview with Brian Bradley. So here we go. All right, guys, it's my honor to introduce our guest for today's show, founder of Bradley Legal Corp, Brian Bradley. Brian, how you doing today, my friend?
I'm doing great, Kevin, and thanks for having me on and putting this podcast together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. I know you're super busy running your practice and helping people save their assets. So I appreciate you joining us here today. And this is a very important topic, one that it should be top priority when you're considering investing in real estate. And so, why don't we start, before we get into the meat and potatoes and start talking about asset protection, all the different nuances that exist with it, maybe Brian, take a minute and just tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself, your background, and what it is, other than just asset protection in general, what you guys specialize in doing.
Yeah, no problem. So as you said, I'm an asset protection attorney, and I got into asset protection from the litigation side of the law. A lot of these guys that do asset protection started in estate planning. I was on the attack side in court, and I just had a lot of clients walking into my door who were being sued, and their lives just turned completely upside down. A lot of them had insurance, and some had revocable living trust. And unfortunately, this gives a lot of people a false sense of security because revocable living trusts aren't designed for protection of your assets. They don't offer any protection. And then your insurance, I like insurance, and it's a good thing to have. And I advocate for insurance, but your insurance, as soon as you're sued with a big lawsuit, is going to try to separate themselves from you. And so I had these clients that kept coming in the door, being sued, false sense of security, asking me like, hey, Brian, what can you do to help us? And like, at that point, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do because you didn't proactively set up any plan or structure for these kind of rainy days. And so what I wanted to do with my practice was add value for the clients. And so what I do now is act as a family advisor, and we focus on setting up protection systems and teams like CPAs and third-party trust administrators, financial advisors, helping you if you don't have insurance, find insurance companies, real estate agents. And then we try to lead the clients that follow an acronym ECCM, and that stands for effectiveness, control, cost, and maintenance. That's kind of what all your listeners would want to look for when they're shopping around for an attorney to set up a protection system. And then our goal is also to add value with life preservation and peace of mind, because when you're talking about asset protection, at the end of the day, this is what your clients and the listeners are talking about. I want to preserve my lifestyle. I want to be able to sleep well at night. And then we try to pick up secondary tax benefits and tax credits just to find missing dollars for clients. Like, I just want them to actually have an estate and a legacy to pass down later on.
Fantastic. So just generally speaking, is there a certain size, as far as like net worth is concerned, or assets under management, or general value of holdings, to where a client should consider your services, or consider, really asset protection in general?
I think there's a lot of different systems that anybody, or structures that anybody can get into. So if your goal is to have a business or to have one single investment property, there's entry places where you can start that are affordable and reasonable, like LLCs. And then just as you grow and the more you have, the more protection you're going to need. And then you can just grow in with it. So the system that you would create for, a person with a medium-sized income plus one or two investment properties is going to be completely different than the system you would set up for somebody with, $5 or $10 million, which would be different than somebody with, $500 million. So I would say if you're starting out, start small, get an LLC, 2 LLCs maybe, have one as your operating company, one as your holding company. And then as you grow, you're going to need to start looking into more advanced estate planning and asset protection planning like we do with exemption planning, on and offshore asset protection trust, equity structure planning.
Okay, Brian. So why don't we attack it from this angle? Why don't you use me as a case study or an example? We can run through a hypothetical situation as though I'm reaching out to you on behalf of your services that you offer. I'm in need of guidance. I'm in need of an advisory service in order to ensure that our assets are protected and that we've got the right structures in place. And so I'll let you go ahead and take it from there. But let's roll through this, because I think this would be the best way to address it. Folks can really relate with exactly where we're at with things. A lot of folks have very similar size portfolios that listen into the show. And so I think this would be the best way to approach it. Do you agree?
I agree. And then some of the topics I think we can then just break down so they understand what we're even talking about. Perfect. We can do that after the hypothetical.
So ring, Brian. Yeah. I need your services, man. I need to protect my assets. What do we do?
Yeah. Hey, Kevin. Thanks. So first, I want you to understand that no silver bullet exists, and asset protection isn't going to be a system that is going to avoid a lawsuit. It's just to put you in the best position in case the lawsuit comes your way to where you can actually protect yourself. Mm-hmm. It all starts with a diagnostic and an evaluation. So what we are going to do is send you a link that you are then going to fill out all your assets to. And then what this is going to do is allow us to look through metrics and analytics. And this way we can actually break down our exemption planning for you. What we're going to do is look at where your assets are positioned and what state they're in. And then we start with maximizing state and federal exemptions. and then seeing also what IRS tax advantages have not been picked up or optimized, and that way we can try to find you some missing dollars. So with this phone call we would have, I'll generally always have my financial advisor and trust administrator, trust CFO on the line with us, because they'll actually go over this actuarial statistics that the diagnostic is going to run off of. We also can work with your CPAs, and if you don't have a CPA, we have a large network of investment-friendly CPAs. And what we want to first do, like I said, is maximize exemptions, because exemptions are legal rights. And then by knowing what assets fall into this exemption, this can then change the facts of what actually needs to be protected or repositioned and how later on. So it goes to the saying, like, if you want to change your taxes, change your facts. The same thing is going to go with asset protection, and the two will actually work hand in hand. So just by first maximizing your exemptions, we can then change the facts, and then that will change what potentially we may or may not have to use later on for additional planning. After that, we're then going to move on to advanced planning. If you have any remaining assets that are outside of the exemptions, and for this, we're going to most likely be using asset protection trust, and then we're going to be picking jurisdictions, and that's going to be either domestically or offshore. As well as evaluating your insurance, any umbrella policies you have, and traditional estate planning inheritance, like revocable living trust, so you can pass something down. The type of asset protection trust we're going to generally use are going to be self-settled spendthrift trusts, and this is just because these are trusts specifically designed for asset protection. And then I'm sure you have a lot of California listeners on here. There's a separate plan that we would use if you're a California resident that falls under section 704.115 of CCP, which is called a private retirement plan, which all assets that would fit into this plan based off the analytics and metrics are completely exempt from lawsuits and creditors. And this has been in existence for over 40 years. And so that's the basic rundown of what we'll be going over.
Okay, maybe we can go into a little bit more detail on each one of those individual topics. For example, exemptions planning. Let's break that down a little bit and give a better understanding to the listeners as to what that really even means.
Yeah, no, and that's this is the main staple besides jurisdiction selection. Mm-hmm. And the reason we start with exemption planning is because an exemption is a right that you have under the law, so it's automatically protected. And now exemptions are going to vary state by state. So your listeners are going to have to go and talk to their lawyers to see what those are. The good thing is that from what we have is our analytics are plugged in with every single state exemption. To understand an exemption, I think most listeners are going to understand about homestead exemptions, so like Florida and Texas. So for example, in Florida, your home, regardless of its value, is absolutely protected from creditors so long as it's contained within 1/4 of an acre. This is what an exemption is. It's an absolute legal right. Just think about O.J. Simpson, the famous NFL football player who got acquitted of murder, but then the family came back and sued him in a civil lawsuit, and he lost literally everything to his name, even his Heisman Trophy, except for his Florida mansion and his NFL pension plan, because they were completely exempt. And so for your investors here, real estate investing really is a passive cash flow investment for rents and equity buildup. So it's really a retirement game. And like I said, for your California listeners, another great example is that private retirement plan based off of section 704.115. And what we can even add value in the protection system, because just in the last 24 months using just exemption planning, we protected over 600 million in assets and saved over, about, 45 million in taxes just by looking over missed benefits and codes, and also by using a better and safer form of protection by exemptions.
Are the exemptions like something that the typical estate planning attorneys or maybe real estate attorneys might accidentally pass over?
That is a really good question, and it is. And there's a few good reasons why I think exemption planning is kind of passed over. One, exemption planning is tax neutral. And so there's not much for a financial advisor or other attorneys to make money off of. Mm-hmm. The other reason is they're state specific. So what's going to happen with your other law firms, your larger national law firms, is they're trying to pull in clients from all over the nation. And so they're trying to fit clients into easy packages that everybody can get into, like use an asset protection trust, use an LLC. There's too many state exemptions that they want to waste their time on. And plus they can overcharge, or not overcharge, I think that's a bad word to use, but they can charge more for more elaborate created systems, with business operation plans versus just a basic exemption planning. I mean, it's not basic. It's going to be more than setting up an LLC, but they can charge more through more advanced estate planning than using exemption planning. And attorneys aren't taught this. Like asset protection, you're not taught in law school. It's not on the bar exam. You're not taught it in law school. CPAs aren't taught this. So unless you actually jumped into a firm that does this, they would never even know about exemption planning. And we work with a lot of CPAs and financial advisors. Most have never even heard about exemption planning because their firms just don't know about it or teach it.
You referenced Texas and Florida with the homestead exemption. Are there any other states that have fairly significant exemptions that come to mind that folks might not be even familiar with or aware of?
Yeah, the biggest one, and I go on to the Californias because California is what's called an unfriendly asset protection state. And there's not much that you can do to protect your assets in California, and it's a very litigious state. The biggest protection for exemptions, even though California has no exemptions, is the private retirement plan under 704.115, because anything that you can qualify to fit into this retirement plan is completely exempt. And the great thing about it is it's not like a normal retirement plan, like your federal or RISA or government regulated plans, because they were created before that. So there's no age limit on distributions. There's no 59.5 age limit. You create your own age, your own distribution age and retirement age based off statistical metrics and analytics. So you're self-directing basically your own retirement. And the trust administrators that we use their actuarial statistics, like a big fancy word for statistical analysis, on how to fund this plan and stay case law compliant. And I just like to use Trust CFO because these guys are hands down the best ones I've ever seen and used in staying case law compliant and adding value to the clients to find those, overlooked tax benefits and credits and finding missing dollars. And the other great thing about these, the California plan here with the PRP section 704.115 is you can actually protect future value of the assets, which most firms don't look into and do. So what this means is that we're protecting the real estate values that haven't been earned yet. And so what we're doing is taking the actuarial calculations through the trust administrators that they do, and then we take that amount to fill the gap that you currently have with the future retirement funds that you would need. And then we add that future amount straight into the plan. And so I know that not everybody's going to have that amount of money sitting around. So if you don't currently have that future amount sitting in your bank account, but let's say you have a business that's growing and it's appreciating in value, or you have real estate investments and that's appreciating like all real estate does, we can protect that amount through the actuarial calculations and then just fund that amount. And then we use a promissory note to protect it until you sell the assets down the road. And then you just pay back the promissory note.
Huh. Interesting. And that's California, correct? That's
California. So that's one of those, you would never hear about this in California because most don't know about it.
Interesting.
But it's one of the most powerful.
Well, we have a pretty significant listener base in California, but, probably makes up about 10% of the overall listener base. So,
Yeah. So I would say a great point here is, let's say, you have these higher net worth clients that you were talking about, 50 million, and we can only fund into an exemption 20 million of that or 30 million of that. And you still have 20 million remaining. What are you going to do with the excess? So that goes into advanced planning. And so what we would do here is then start looking at jurisdiction and picking what jurisdiction would we set up an asset protection trust in.
Got it. And so let's go there. Let's talk about, let's use me as an example and give me guidance as to what jurisdiction makes the most sense for me to set up the asset protection trust, for that, whatever the 20, 30, $40 million remaining that isn't protected at this point.
Yeah. And so there's no state specific issue here like there are with exemptions. So you can use asset protection trust for anybody in any state. So we don't need to worry about that. Excuse me. What jurisdiction means is that the laws and the rules that govern you and trusts and business entities are different from one jurisdiction to another, or one state to another, one country to another. So you have two options when picking a jurisdiction. You can either go stay domestically in the U.S. and some states are better than others, like Nevada, or you can set them up offshore in another country like the Cook Islands. I prefer the power of going offshore if and when it's ever needed. And it's simply because the Cook Islands is the best home court advantage. And the power of the foreign offshore trust, like the Cook Islands, is that it has statutory non-recognition of any other jurisdictional court orders. And so what this means is that your U.S. judgment if one was made against you, is going to be completely worthless in the Cook Islands. Like they'd have to start their case completely all over from scratch, facing the highest legal standard in the world beyond a reasonable doubt. They'd have to front the costs and pay and to fly in a judge from New Zealand. They'd front all court costs. The claims aren't amendable, which is a big issue here in the US. Like once you file your complaint there, it's completely done. You can't wait till discovery process is over to come back and amend it and add more claims. If you lose, you pay. So you got a burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, a 1-year statute of limitations. So they probably already missed their time to sue you. Most likely they're going to lose. So then they're going to be paying their court costs plus all your court costs back. And I think a good comparison though is a question would be, do I have to go always foreign, or is there a way to kind of bridge the gap and be, both domestic and foreign? Because there's pros and cons to everything. If you're going completely foreign, I mean, if you think about what we talked about, like effectiveness, control, cost, and maintenance, foreign trusts get 5 out of 5 stars if out of effectiveness, like statutory non-recognition. But the downfall of them is high cost. You're going to be out of control, and then you're going to have compliance not issues, but more compliance because you're foreign. We only put about 5% of our clients purely foreign. So the other option is, okay, what about being purely domestic? Being purely domestic isn't always the best option because they are good on cost. It's going to be cheaper. It's going to be not more effective, but the maintenance won't be as much. But the domestic options are going to fail on effectiveness just because of the foundation of the U.S. legal system. The foundation isn't to recognize, for asset protection, the foundation is not to recognize another jurisdiction's court orders. If you get a court order, you want to say, too bad, we don't care. But that doesn't work in the U.S. legal system and the Constitution because of the full faith and credit clause. So you can't run from judgments here. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of domestic asset protection trusts now fail. And so what we like to do is bridge the gap. And so we have what's called a bridge trust that we use, and you get the benefits of both worlds. You get the benefit of being domestic and purely domestic asset protection trust with the power of the Cook Islands in your back pocket if and ever you need it. And so that's your win-win. And the value is the protection of the Cook Islands with the maintenance of the easiness of the cost, the IRS tax maintenance, and you get the effectiveness of the Cook Islands.
Interesting. So that 5% of your clients that would solely be offshore based, what's the deciding factor on that 5% and why they just wouldn't go with that hybrid structure that you mentioned?
Normally because they're already under attack and they need something very, very fast. Okay. And the likelihood is once we created that hybrid structure, we would have to go foreign anyways. So you might as well just go straight foreign right now because they're under threat already. What you want is clients that come in before they're under a threat and under attack. And if everything is fine, there's no attack, they want to be proactive, they're high net worth, I would steer them towards the bridge trust because you get the benefit of the domestic ease with the power if and when it's ever needed of the Cook Islands. But until you need it, it's overkill just to go purely foreign.
Give me the idea of the timing and of the process, the discovery process of when you're onboarding a new client. I know that's a loaded question because it really depends on, the size of their holdings, what states are located in. I mean, there's lots of other factors and variables there, but just generally speaking, someone reaching out to you that's looking for your advice, your consultancy, and that has a significant amount of holdings. I mean, timeliness to get this all set up and rolling.
Yeah. So the initial call, I would initially send the link to fill out the diagnostic. That should only take about 5 to 10 minutes, and then we would generate the metrics and the analytics. We would set up a phone call with you and review everything with you in more detail and break down how we would reposition the assets into what structures. That would probably take about an hour and a half phone call, and then from there, depending on the planning. Generally about a 3-week to 4-week turnaround for the structures to be set up.
And how do banks feel? I mean, when there's properties that actually have debt in place on them, how do banks feel about these? Like, for example, the offshore structure.
Yeah, it's just
what's
like
their temperature?
Yeah, it's just like any other trust. As long as they know that you're just not trying to avoid paying a mortgage or a loan, they have no problem with it. You can relate it to a lower level of trust, land trust, for example, or just your revocable living trust. You can transfer your property out of your personal name into any type of trust that you want. The bank may would just want to say like, hey, can we see that this is a real trust and not you trying to scam us? And that's just a phone call that your attorney would make, and to take about 1 minute phone call, and they'll be comfortable with it, and there's no issue.
All right, good deal, Brian. So what other relevant topics have we missed here that are incredibly important for our listeners to know about regarding asset protection? I'm sure there's a few.
There's a couple. There's a lot of big ones, but I think the two biggest ones are, insurance and where it plays into the scope of this, as well as fraudulent transfers. Mm-hmm. And so we can cover either one of those, whichever order you want to go into.
Yeah, go ahead and roll with it. You pick one, which one you want to go with, and we'll roll with it.
Yeah, so let's go with insurance. This is definitely a very hot topic. Insurance is a great place to start, but it's not the end. I see a lot of clients having just a false sense of security, thinking that if they are going to be sued or get sued, they can just solely rely on their insurance to cover them for any damages. And this isn't the case. But I do recommend every single person to get insurance, and as much as they can afford, even an umbrella policy. Mm-hmm. But they also need to read their insurance policy, like read the fine print, understand what's not covered and what the claim limit is. So a good place to start is to actually first understand that real estate law is the most heavily litigated area of law there is. There's just so many ways for an investor to get sued. And so if this is the intent of your listeners and your investors that are already invested in real estate, or if they want to start investing in real estate, it's really just a matter of when and in what condition you're going to be in to defend yourself when a lawsuit comes your way. Mm-hmm. And so just keep in mind that insurance companies don't cover you for fraud, punitive damages, or intentional wrongdoings. They don't pay claims that are going to be the direct result of your unlawful acts. And so what your listeners are going to need to understand is the basic concepts of insurance defense. So this is what they can be sued for. And from the very first statement or communication or email that they've made with a buyer or a seller at any point in time, those lawsuits are going to be made based off allegations of fraud. And the courts are going to look at those statements, like, for example, you sending an email saying all the plumbing was redone. And the courts are going to say, well, that's an email, that's a statement. And so those statements are now going to be considered intentional acts. And what your insurance provider is now going to say is that, well, we're not going to go and cover you in a case where you or potentially did something wrong and it's intentional. The insurance agency is now going to just try to create separation from you. And that's going to be through these intentional acts and wrongdoing arguments and defenses. And so my take on insurance is insurance helps, have insurance, but it's not good enough. So the next thing you need is an asset protection system, and just build more layers to protect yourself.
Okay, fantastic. No, that makes sense. I mean, there's many conversations that I've had over the years with folks that we literally get into that debate of the insurance, and I've got sufficient insurance. I've also got an umbrella policy. Like, what's the worst that could happen? I'm fully covered.
Claim limits. Yeah,
exactly. I've got more coverage than what I need. That's a false statement.
Yeah, or what if you're a doctor and you're an investor and you get sued from your malpractice, and your malpractice insurance only covers $1 million, but you just get hit with a $2-3 million lawsuit. Now what are you going to do with the rest of where are you going to come up with the rest of the money?
Yeah. No, it's a very good point. And there was one other item that you felt were like
fraudulent transfers.
Big topic that we absolutely need to cover here. So
fraudulent transfers. Yeah, so this really is like the big kahuna issue when you're talking about asset protection. And it's often one of the most asked about issues with clients and the most misunderstood by most people. So a fraudulent transfer or conveyance is a transfer in ownership of an asset for little or no consideration, meaning you didn't really pay much for it to the other person, with the intent, and the intent is really where it comes down to hinder, delay, or defeat the claim of another. The key is the intent, like I said. So in other words, the courts are going to look at what was your state of mind when you transferred that asset. And this state of mind is also going to have to be combined with an actual effect that the transfer had. Did it actually delay or hinder or defraud a creditor? If you don't have that state of mind, then that means no fraudulent conveyance. If there's no creditor that existed when you made that conveyance, then there's not going to be a fraudulent conveyance. That's why you want to proactively set up your asset protection systems, because if you wait till you already have a known creditor, it's too late. If you do it before you have a known creditor, there's no state of mind, there's no effect. Now, if we
give me a real world example. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Brian. Give me a real world example of like that actually playing out.
Yeah. So there's a case in California, which is a pretty good case, where there was a general contractor, a pool. Yeah, he was a pool. He built pools for houses, and a pool crack that he made caused a lot of property damage, and he knew that he was going to get sued. So then before the lawsuit was filed, this contractor went and created an asset protection system, knowing that he was about to be sued and that he was going to be liable for the damages. Because he knew about that, the court said, no, we're going to go and pierce that protection system. Now, if he was proactive and did this beforehand, years before when there was no potential lawsuit, there was no creditors coming after him, the likelihood of that being pierced would have been very, very little, because courts want people to be proactive and plan. It's just basic estate planning.
Got it. And I interrupted you. You're in the middle of a thought when I interrupted you. So
yeah. So then I was going to pair it to fraud, and so fraud is an intentional misrepresentation of material fact. And it's done to cause someone to act or stop them from acting to their detriment. And so these are very different in definition and how they're applied in the law. So your listeners need to understand, fraud is a crime. Fraudulent transfers, how most of these arguments are going to come through, is not a crime. It's what we call a supplemental or secondary proceeding, where you get sued, they start finding out what assets you have and what assets you transferred. And then if it's discovered that you made a transfer for little or no consideration within a certain amount of time, like generally about 5 years, the other party is then going to go and ask that judge to undo that transfer. So the remedy here is just to give those assets back so that the creditors now have access to them and to collect on a judgment. Yeah. And so this is where the importance of jurisdiction really relates with fraudulent conveyance and how it comes into play all together. The reason why, for example, an offshore trust is so powerful in this regard is that in order to undo a transfer, the court has to have the power to tell that person that you gave that asset to give it back. And so any court in the U.S. doesn't have the power to tell an offshore Cook Island trustee to give it back. They're just going to tell them to go pound sand, because they statutorily don't recognize U.S. orders or judgments. Now, if you compare this to anything in the U.S., any system that's purely domestic doesn't have that ability to say no. And that's just because of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution. So when you're juggling domestic versus offshore, you just need to understand the eyes of where lawsuits are going to line up and where the different power structures are.
Give me an idea of the general costs associated with the maintenance of an offshore, more so the hybrid setup, because as you had mentioned, that really pertains to about 95% of your client base.
Exactly. So it's going to be a lot. It's going to be about $1,500, on the maintenance, annual maintenance, versus if you were to be purely foreign, you're talking about $5,000, even up to $10,000 a year.
Got it.
Exemption planning, generally about $4,500 a year in management, but you're also then recouping a lot of money because the trust administrators are administering your trust and going over your taxes and credits and your tax benefits and finding missed dollars. So we generally find, even though the exemption planning admin is more, you're actually getting more money back, and it pays for itself 10 times over, just because the trust administrative guys are finding you more money.
Yeah. This it's just a great topic to be discussing here today, because here's the thing, the folks that are listening, everyone knows that they need to be doing this stuff, right? I mean, everyone knows that they need to be really thinking through this in detail and hiring an individual like yourself that's experienced that can help with the correct structures. But there's way too many that are reactionary, and it doesn't work out in your favor when you act in a reactionary manner and a lawsuit comes flying your way. It's just, and unfortunately, it's too late at that point in time for most. And so that's why I think that it's an incredibly important topic that we're discussing here today. And I appreciate you coming on the show, Brian, and sharing this information with us. Is there anything else that that is of vital importance that we could have missed that you'd like to share with our folks here today?
No, I think we covered it all. And,
what is the best way to reach you? What is the best way for folks to have an interest in what you offer, your services? What's the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so they can reach me on my website, www.btblegal.com, or email me, Brian, Brian, at btblegal.com. And we send out the diagnostic calculators for free. And then I'd rather educate clients than, I used to charge for the evaluation. I don't do it anymore. I'd rather just do the evaluation and get people educated in the knowledge so they can actually not worry about, I don't want to go pay for a consultation that I may not use for legal advice. So I'd rather just do the consultations, get it out to them, and then let them make an educated decision.
That's fantastic. Well, Brian, you shared a lot of great information here today, but now I'm going to enter in what I call the gold nugget segment. This is where we're going to work to wrap things up here today. And hopefully you've left one gold nugget of advice in your pocket that you wouldn't mind sharing with our folks that might inspire and motivate them as they progress in that real estate investing career of theirs. So what would that one last gold nugget be if you had one?
Yeah, I say be proactive. Don't go this alone. If you're investing for cash flow, use your team. If you don't have a team, set it up. That way you can do what you're good at, finding deals, running a business, and use your CPAs and your lawyers and your agents as they're supposed to be. Don't do this all on your own. Otherwise, you'll fail.
I think that's why a lot of folks, why they shy away from it. It's overwhelming. I mean, especially if they're deep into their investing career and they've got a number of assets under ownership, but they're kind of like a solopreneur at that point in time. I mean, it's overwhelming to even go down this path if they don't have a support team in place.
It is. And I think part of it comes into a little bit probably ego, because your solo guys or self-started business guys are used to doing everything on their own. And so that's where you need to realize you're good at creating a business, or you're good at finding deals and closing deals. Do what you're good at. Create the team. You'll make more money if you actually have your team and you utilize them properly.
Yes, that's great advice. And guys, again, we're going to put all the information in the show notes of how to get in contact with Brian. But one last time, his website is btblegal.com. And Brian, I want to thank you for joining us here today. And everyone that's listening in, thank you for joining us. And until we meet again next week, this is Kevin Bupp wishing you huge success.
Congratulations! Now you've got more of the best tricks of the trade in building massive amounts of passive income from real estate. For more amazing resources, visit realestateinvestingforcashflow.com, and we'll see you next Monday morning.